Oh, just in time for that train to go running. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it is I, the Church Warden, aka the Wonka, coming to you live from the Lilly Pad here at the epicenter of the multiverse on twitch.tv/homebrewrp, putting my face in your interweb. Welcome once again. Tonight we're going to be covering a whole mess of things that I hope are going to help you as both a game master and or player flesh out your world. And it is your world, whether you are a game master or player, because this is a conjoined effort of strange minds coming together to craft something incredible. So, that being said, tonight I would like to focus on, well, what really matters: the people of the world, the players, the NPCs or non player characters, if you're not familiar with the term, and what we can do to make each one of them special or unique, which is a big deal. It's very easy to fall into a fallacy of repetition with a character because they are your avatar in the game. They are you on some level. And just as any artist will generally agree, not all, but generally will agree, there's a little bit of yourself in everything you create. Um, that being said, I do want to point out that if you have missed any of these, you can, of course, go back to our YouTube channel. Once again, that's Homebrew RP. We do store them all there as they come, as well as our live streams of our various tabletop sessions and other discussions at play, such as the work we're doing on another campaign with Lord of Chance for the Dresden Files. So please feel free to check all of those out as you will. Also, tonight I do have a soundtrack playing. If you have the Amazon Prime or Amazon Music Unlimited account, you can actually tune in, and I'll be DJing some music in the background tonight. So feel free to tune in and join me there. Anyway, enough of that. Sorry, I've got a vent blowing right up my pant leg. My kneecaps are getting cold. So anyway, let's get right to it, shall we? Tonight's artwork that you can see, no, there. Yeah, there. It's over there. Was some artwork I found by Steve Sketches on Reddit. Fantastic piece. I think this is really awesome. I'd love to get a print of it. Feel free to check him out on Reddit. He's got a lot of other artwork. That being said, once again, as I said, I'm waffling. Let's get into it. So, as I said, the main fallacy people get into when creating a character or an NPC or a BBEG for their game is there's a lot of tropes, a lot of stereotypes that you can fall into. The biggest one being yourself. You really have to think outside of the box. You have to think about this character's motivation, this character's reason for existing, what brought them to this point in their lives, etc., etc. For instance, and this is probably one of the biggest, also one of the more common known things, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there right off the bat because of that. A villain generally doesn't believe they're the villain. For the most part, people don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an evil bastard. No, I mean, that just, people aren't built that way for the most part. Most villains think in some way that they're the good guy, that they're saving something through their actions, they're preserving something or endearing someone else or even themselves. But either way, they don't necessarily view themselves as the villain, generally. So an easy way to break past that general stereotypical trope right off the bat is to get that out of your head. Get that idea out of your head that your villain, let's say, just to focus it as a good place to start. Your villain is the stereotypical Dr. Evil bad guy, okay? Your villain needs to be dynamic, needs to be believable, and on some level even relatable. The best villains throughout all of literature, all of written history even, are the ones that get under your skin, the ones that make you kind of see their point, the ones that make you question yourself sometimes even. And those are the ones that create a really interesting and dynamic story arc for your players. They allow you to dive in and make your players question sometimes, or not just rush in guns blazing all the time, because there's a person behind those tentacles, right? There's a living, emotionally charged creation there. So, what brought them to that point? Especially with your main characters, you're always going to want, at least in your own mind, to come up with some form of backstory. Now, I don't mean they were born here, they had some parents, their parents were A, B, C, or D, they had a brother or sister, blah, blah, blah. Event happened to character A that led to event B, and now they're an adventurer, yay, treasure and riches and fame and fortune. Now, that's not to say that that old trope can't work for you. There's nothing wrong with it. There is no wrong way to do this unless you are enforcing your will on other people or ruining someone else's good time in mass generally. But at the same time, you want to break out. You want to be creative. You're playing a role playing game because it's outside of the norm. It's not Monopoly. It has a face, it has a spirit, it has an ideal, it has these intellectual, heady concepts that branch out into theology and dogma and philosophy and economics and politics and like everything that you will find in the real world exists in the game on some level. Sometimes more extreme, sometimes less, but it's there. And you want to involve yourself in all of it. Get immersed. So when I say this, like, sure, you want to know about their family, but who was their family? Who was their family to them? What was their relationship to their family? Did they have a loving parents or abusive upbringing? Did they feel abandoned or left out? Did their dad work too much? There's all these common tropes within real life you can pull from, but now you've got a whole realm of fantasy too. My dad was turned into a carnivorous rabbit and ate my mother on my 16th birthday, and I was scarred for. I mean, you can get crazy with it. That's okay. And sometimes it'll help breed some really diverse character arcs for you. Just to go outside that norm a little bit. That's okay. And I've seen people do it. I've seen people come up with some really amazing zingers. And every time somebody else does that, it's inspiring to me. So I love to hear these ideas. And in fact, if you ever want to send me your ideas and have a discussion about them, please feel free to reach out to me through the Homebrew RP channels. And I will happily discuss character ideas and flaws and faults and strengths and weaknesses, everything you want. Because I'm a big nerd. And you probably are too if you're watching this. So let's nerd out together, shall we? Slancha. So we have this idea of making sure that there's, once again, just as we discussed last episode with the environment, a foundation, a cornerstone to build upon. And this is such a vastly important concept. You're going to hear me say this a lot because these cornerstone foundations are everything. You cannot build on sand. You have to have a solid rock. You have to have a foundation. So with your character, let's branch out away from the villain idea because we're talking about characters, we're talking about NPCs, the whole 9 yards. With your character, one of the things that sets your characters aside from the normies, the NPCs, the common townsfolk, is that they are more than normal. Just your stats, for instance. Let's start there because it's a game of numbers, and you can really use these numbers to build what you have. They're not just there as a mechanic; they're actually added a lot of flavor as well. Now, there's some discussion about this, and it's actually kind of irrelevant as long as the base principle is there. But right about midpoint between 10 and 12 is generally what you're going to find in an average person, stat wise. A 9, 10 strength, maybe an 11 intelligence. It's just a normal guy for the most part. Everything's kind of baseline across the board. So every stat that your character has above that is putting them above that normal standard. And these above normal standards, these above normal abilities, are what set them apart and make them into heroes and adventurers. And that's why they get into this. I mean, Phil down the corner, who works 9 to 5 at the Jiffy Lube, you call him up one day and say, "Hey, Phil, let's go track down a dragon and get his horde." He's probably going to say, "Yeah, but I got to work Monday and the kids need a bath tonight." Right? Because that's normal. But your characters are anything but. And I think that it should probably reflect that in whatever you're building, that they're not entirely normal, that they're actually above normal. You are creating the heroes of your universe, or villains, depending. I know some of you like to play evil characters, and that's fine too. So we have a baseline set. They're above average, right? Above average. We've mentioned that you do need to set a solid foundation. You need to understand where they came from and how that built their motivation to become who they are. But now we need to decide why they've chosen this haphazard and ultimately dangerous and often fatal lifestyle. Yes, the rewards are vast. There's wealth and there's glory and the opportunity to become legend or more. But that only drives certain people, and a lot of those people even only drives them so far. And this is something you'll find as your character develops, because even though this is a mechanical structure, even though they have these stat based on numbers and dice rolls, there is an organic process to this. Your character, unless you are just absolutely adamant about stopping this from happening, will grow just like a natural person might, an organic individual will. The experiences that they have over the course of their adventures, the people they meet, the influences they come under, the victories and the tragedies that they suffer are going to evolve them into a greater being than they were before, into the hero that they will become, into the legend that you will probably someday, 10 years down the road, at some huge convention surrounded by other geeks like us, say, "Let me tell you about Baldy McFatpants the First and his epic tale against the kobolds of Dagger Spire and the way that he decimated the dragon Poo-Poo Head." All right, I'm losing steam on that one, but you get the idea. You will tell these tales. You will have this pocket full of adventures to share with other people, with like-minded individuals, people who share this passion for fantasy and role-playing games and science fiction. And believe me, it's an amazing thing that happens. Well, if you want to be a legend, or if you don't want to be a legend, there's a question coming in on chat here. If you don't want to be a legend and are content being a sidekick, that's fine too. Sidekicks play just as important a role in all these stories as anyone. The concept of being a support player is not in any way lesser than being the person in the limelight. Just because, Sir Ultimato the Potato is up in the spotlight with his gilded armor and his shining holy avenger plus 15, it doesn't mean that the cleric that kept him alive, that's quiet and just content to sit in the back and make sure he doesn't die, is any less important than Sir Ultimato is. Because without that sidekick, he's not going to make it. He doesn't get to that point. Your sidekick is part of the legend. A legend is not an individual thing. And yes, Prem, you're right. Comic relief is always welcome. And actually, I would even go so far as to say a necessary and welcome addition to just about any game. If you're not laughing, at least at some point during your game, you're probably not having as much fun as you should be. If you've ever watched our streams, for instance, we are constantly cracking up. We're constantly making jokes and sharing memes, which most of you can't see. I wish you could, but we'd probably get in trouble if you could, because they get a little crazy. But yeah, that's what I mean. The support role is every bit as important. I mean, Batman without Robin loses something, for instance, and I hope I don't get sued for mentioning these trademark names, but you get the idea. Um, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, which probably are once again terrible representations, but you get the idea. They're when I say a legend is something that encompasses the entire story, not necessarily an individual. But I think I'm getting off track here. So let me get back on there. What I'm mainly trying to get at is we need a motivation for the present as well. Right now, we need to figure out why your character is doing the things they're doing. Is it for gold and glory? Is it because of some dark mystery from their past? Is it because they want to change the world? Because they want to get into the political structure of the world that they live in? What is their reason for being there? Now, this doesn't have to even be a spoken thing, but if it's in the back of your mind, it will change the motivations that drive you and thus change the direction you take the character. There's a lot of role playing tools within character creation that also facilitate this. Alignment, for instance. Now, alignment is probably one of the most debated topics of character creation that's out there. And I say that because even though they've been discussed ad nauseum, and even though they have been written about and described in every player handbook and dungeon master's guide ever to be created, there's still a lot of wiggle room. A lot of it is a suggestive tool to help you direct your character's actions, right? I mean, a thief is not necessarily evil because they're a thief, for instance. You don't call an urchin who steals bread because they're starving evil. They're stealing for a just reason. Not to get too um, philosophical or whatever there, but you get the idea. There's many reasons somebody will do the things they're doing, and these motivations, like I'm talking about, will drive them much harder than any alignment ever could. Alignment is a suggestion. I know back in the early days, a lot of you youngsters probably don't remember, but there actually used to be alignment languages, which never really fully made sense. But yeah, it's changed a lot over the years, and it's finally, I think, gotten to the point where it is generally considered more of a suggestive tool. However, using that tool and deciding based upon the alignment choice that you make how your character interprets that choice, not necessarily how the player does or how the guidebooks even do. How does your character explain their actions through that choice of alignment? Once again, you can really utilize this to kind of bring your character to a unique point within that dialogue between you and your character. And yet it is kind of a dialogue. You're creating this person as you go. So use these tools available. I mean, you have your class, your race, your alignment, the languages that you choose, the skills that you focus on, your background. And now that in these later iterations of D&D especially, there are actually backgrounds and other RP tools available that you can use to further flesh this out, to give them quirks for their background, and quirks for their present, and quirks for their personality. I really suggest using them and even exploring some of the homebrew additions to them. And in fact, make your own. Once again, if you have any that you'd like to share, I'd love to see some new ones. We actually share a tremendous amount of unique content by a lot of our friends and fellow gamers and fans on the Homebrew RP Discord site. And a lot of people lately, especially, have been coming to us and showing this and sharing them to us and asking for viewpoints and critiques and advice. And I think it's fantastic. I honestly feel enriched because of it, because nobody thinks the same as I do. And even though I've been at this for 2.5 decades plus, I still have a lot to learn. And the day that stops, I should probably stop playing. So please send me your ideas. Come and visit us on the Discord server. I believe there should be links to that on Twitch and through our other websites as well. We want to hear from you. We want to get to know you. We are expanding our community every day, and we're planning on new games, and we want to bring in new blood and see what you have to offer and add to our ever growing family of Brewsters. So definitely look us up. Anyway, enough plugging. Slancha. So, just to kind of finalize this a little bit, we've kind of gone over your big bad evil guy. We've gone over kind of some really simple ways to help flesh out your character. I do want to touch on NPCs because this is probably one of the all-time hardest parts of being a game master. Now, if you've never been a game master, a lot of players may not even realize this or even think about it, but every monster, every character, every innkeeper and tavern master, every mayor and guard, every kobold and goblin that you encounter, your game master is hopefully trying to flesh out and make every one of these encounters unique. And it can be exhausting. It's a very difficult task, not only to do and try to keep every one of these encounters unique, but to also not make them overbearing or a caricature of what's intended. Monsters, for instance, are very easy to just say, this is monster A, there's 5 of them, this is kind of what they look like, kill them. It's very easy to go there. And in some cases, it's just the way it needs to be because, we don't have a million years of time and people want to move their story along. But your best friend in these cases are descriptors. H.P. Lovecraft was a writer from the 1920s. He did cosmic horror. He invented things like the Necronomicon and Cthulhu. He's inspired people to modern day. And if you're not familiar, I recommend you definitely check it out. But I will say this. One of the things that he was really, really good at, and it's one of the influences I think that came down to people like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and a lot of our more modern horror sci-fi writers, Neil Gaiman, that type of thing, is the use of descriptors, the way that they describe a situation. I'll go to the Twitch page now. It contains links to Discord. Thank you. These are huge. These are what's going to make that encounter memorable. You can say it's a gnarly little kobold, but if you take the time, just a couple minutes to describe the texture of the hair, the sheen on its skin, the color that glints off of its eyes, the way that its teeth are stained, the ragged patchwork cloth and leather of its clothes that make you wonder, where did they tan that hide from? The way that the tips of their spears are just chunks of pockmarked metal. Suddenly that encounter is not just, here's 3 kobolds in a ditch. It's, this guy's actually a little scary, and I'm sure that they're dangerous. Especially for low level. I know we're talking about kobolds, but I tell you what, give me a chance with a high level party in the right situation, and I'll waste your party with kobolds. That's a discussion for another time. But my main point is, with monsters, with NPCs, they need to have a life of their own, because that life that you're breathing into them is breathing life into the experience and world that your players are. Yes, I did actually do that once, Prim. But it's important to bring life to that world that they're in, because at the end of the day, it is your job as a game master to facilitate that, to create that experience, to make it memorable, to make them have fun. Well, not make, but encourage them to have fun. And the more effort that you put into it, the more memorable it's going to be, the more fun they're going to have. So the tavern keeper, Justin Carvinius, at the old raggedy nasty mare inn or whatever, is one thing. But if you give him a little quirk of personality, try your hand at a different voice. Practice it in advance, though. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But that's okay, because it's a game and you tried. And most of the time, I think your players are going to recognize not necessarily the perfection of your voice talent, but the fact that you made the effort. Even if they giggle to the point they pee themselves in your mama's best chairs in the kitchen, they're having fun. And so are you. That's what you need to do. Don't be afraid to try. And that is probably the best advice I could give any of you, players and game master alike. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because they're at your table, and unless you're playing in a tournament at a convention or something, chances are these are your friends. And we're all friends, through the game to some point. And we all like to laugh. We all like to pick on one another and have a good time. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. If you want to have, Justin the bartender throw on an Irish accent and be like, "Oh, geez, now would you look at this? What a nasty little crowd that's come into my tavern here. What can I get for you? Another pint of the black stuff? Yeah? Oh, 3 is it? Sure, 3. We'll get you 3. That'll be 5 copper apiece, and don't you dare go squarely on me." Do it. Put it out there. Because even if they're laughing at you, they're laughing. They're having a good time. Laugh with them, and suddenly they're not laughing at you, they're laughing with you. So that's probably the best advice I can give on this. Try to make it memorable. Try to bring new things. If you have the time, flesh out the NPCs you know they're going to meet. Make notes. Keep a description of the beasts that they're going to encounter so that you can actually pull into the ecology of the creature, just like the environment, just like the characters and the big bad evil guys. Pull from it. Decide how that's going to affect their motivations. Why are they trying to rob the party? Is it because they're starving and they got young at home? Or is it because they're being manipulated into doing it? Or perhaps, maybe they're over a barrel themselves, and you never know. This might be their only way to keep themselves from getting squashed by whatever horrible beastie is lording over them. Well, yeah, if your wife is not a gamer, she probably is laughing at you, Chance. But to be honest, your wife's probably laughing at all of us, so at least you're not alone there. It's not so bad when she's laughing at all of us. But yeah, beyond that, I think the biggest fallacy I run into a lot, especially with newer game masters, is the not understanding and I know this is going to sound really big, but not understanding the socio-political environment of the places where you're playing. And it's difficult. This is hard. This takes a lot of thought, a lot of work in advance, but it pays off in the end. In fact, just recently, this was brought to my attention. Every first 3 Saturdays of the month, we're playing in a homebrew world in one of the games that I run for Homebrew RP, and that's all brand new material. And there are a lot of laws that have come into play based on that setting. And because of that, some of those laws have not been fleshed out by me yet. And the questions come up as we're playing, well, how does this work? And why is this way? And a lot of times I'm having to think on the fly and kind of come up with logical reasons why. But at the same time, it's great because we're fleshing that out. Your world has laws. Your world has a political structure and a way of life. And that needs to have some solid sense to it. And it needs to make sense. And yeah, exactly. You guys are definitely influencing my world by the way that you're interacting with it now. And I have to say, if you come up with a homebrew content, play test it with a group of players and let them interact with it. Let them help you define it, because this is one of the greatest tools I have found now and over the years to create something that's not just in my head. Because if it's just in my head, everything in it is going to be reflective of me and how I think and how I feel. Whereas worlds are not built that way. Worlds are filled with a huge huge myriad of diversity, and allowing other people to interact and influence and suggest things for that world creates that diversity on a much grander scale. So please, don't be selfish with your world. Don't be selfish with your creation. As I said very early on, this is an organic group effort. So let them work, let them help you build, and I promise you at the end of the day, you're going to come up with something that not only you, but your team are going to be incredibly proud of, and something that you're going to have a lot of fun with, and something that's probably going to last you for many, many years to come. Once again, if you have any homebrew stories, if you have any tips or tricks that maybe you think you could add to this discussion, come visit us on our Discord, send it to us through YouTube, through any of our various social media, and we're usually really quick to get back to you. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear what you have to offer. And if you join us on Discord, I'd love to meet you too. I really would. So please come by, check us out, and we'll check you out too, but not in a weird way, because that's just weird. Man, my phone's blowing up. All right, so I think we've reached about the halfway point here. That being said, I'd like to get back into our other project, which is the slow but sure creation of a town together. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, an organic process filled with diversity. This is one of the best ways to do it. So last week we started off, we named the town Silver Falls, decided why, because there's a waterfall nearby, made of white water, lending to the name. The water supply comes from the Kangas River. We've decided we have a constitutional monarchy. There's an appointed burgomaster, Lilly Tovor. She answers to a council of representatives of 6 elected common folk who represent various points of the infrastructure. Now, this is very dry so far. I understand. We're just getting started. This is the bare bones, and not the fun bones like skeletons that erupt from the bottom of the dungeon floor and come after your party. The actual bare bones. So, as I said, we have a constitutional monarchy who have appointed this Lillian Tovar, a burgomaster. I guess we can probably assume by the name that Lillian is a female. And I know this is, we decided, I don't think I wrote it written down, but we kind of figured that this was taking place in my own homebrew world. And yes, once this is done, I will submit this into the actual canon of the creation. So this is your chance to play a part in that. Now we could go on and get into the 6 people, the elected common folk that represent the infrastructure. They're definitely going to be important, but I think to start with, we should probably figure out what 6 points of infrastructure do they represent. Suggestions, obviously, there's farm, there's trade, there's security, there's basic infrastructure like sewage and waste disposal. A burgomaster is basically kind of like a mayor. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. A mayor or a governor of the town. I believe it's an old German or Eastern European term, if I'm not mistaken. We can look it up real quick, though, if you would like. Let's see here. Burgermeister, German. Yeah, chairman of the executive council. There you go. Chairman of the executive council. So, city planning, that's actually a good one. So, that's a good one. We'll go with city planning. So, city planning. So we have city planning for our first step here. And like I said, we'll go through and name these folks later. Let's get these points made first. I still think that obviously security will be a big part. We need a city watch. We need somebody to run that. Tax collection, that's a good one. Very good one, because it takes a lot of money to run a city. I think we definitely need somebody focused on trade. So we'll put trade in there. So we need two more. Two more. I'm going to make a suggestion of base infrastructure support. We'll say, we'll just put it as infrastructure. Hopefully I'm not misspelling here. Infrastructure. And this is basically going to handle waste disposal and city maintenance. In fact, I could probably go ahead and just put infrastructure maintenance just so I don't lose that. Right? Okay, so we have infrastructure maintenance. City planning is going to be more probably along the lines of where roads go, where expansions happen, signs that need to be placed, buildings that need to be torn down or built, that type of thing. Whereas infrastructure maintenance is going to be sewage, waste disposal, body disposal, that type of thing. So it will need one more. What would be one more really good one? Maybe well, you know, we can do that. We can do that. Should we keep infrastructure as a just waste disposable management type thing, or would that be a? We just consider that to be under city planning as well. Because we could probably go either way with it, really. And it would leave us two more options if we did it that way, but. One city planning and yeah. Good idea. City planning and infrastructure. There we go. All right, so that leaves us with two more options, 5 and 6. And of course, if you feel like we've covered everything, let me know. We can always backtrack and reduce the number of the elected folk if we need to. As we know, within the realm of Cairn, it's kind of a little bit of a blasted wasteland, and if this is within the Bacterite Empire, there's not a lot of farming. So agriculture probably wouldn't be that big a deal here. However, education would probably be a big one. Yeah, education and medical, maybe both. Those could be the last two, because I know they're really big on education. Medical would, of course, bring the order of benevolence into the situation as well. So we would have to have at least one of them be an order of the benevolent. I think the coroner would probably fall under medical, though. What do you think? Yeah. I think this actually looks all right to me, unless anyone has any objections. We got city planning and infrastructure, security, tax collection, trade, education, and medical. That seems fairly robust. And then the Burgermeister, kind of the head of that table. It's a committee, so basically everything is done with a vote. So we have these 6 positions. We know right offhand that our medical individual has to be a benevolent. Oof, gotta spell that. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with our homebrew world there, I'll do this really quickly. In our homebrew world of Cairn, the gods have abandoned the world, divine magic no longer exists, and actual medical science has had to take over. the people that run medical science is a new class called a benevolent, and they actually do use medical technology and science to heal and stave off disease and infection and that type of thing. So the Order of Benevolence have stations all over the world. They're kind of exempt from politics because of that, in a way. So that's why I say they would need to be a benevolent. They would need to be a member of that order. So once again, we're already kind of fleshing out how things within our city work. All right, and I think what we'll do is later on, and in fact, over the course of the week, anyone watching, anyone has any ideas, would like to try their hand at creating an NPC to represent any of these positions, I will be open to allowing you guys to submit those through any of the previously mentioned channels to add to our creation here. Once again, as I said, this will be canon once it's said and done and entered into the final structure of the game setting. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts. So what I'd like to get into now, we'll bypass this a little bit just to help going. Here's a question. Now, this isn't a very big city. I think we agreed on that. It's a decent sized, let's say a population of about maybe 1,500 ish. Sound good to you guys? That way it's not too huge, but densely enough that it's still a viable little town. And over the course of these 1,500 people, this is one of my favorite parts. What is crime like? Do we have a lot of crime? Do you have a little crime? Is there an order of thieves that exists there? And maybe there's an offshoot of the Burnt Crows that have an underground kind of terrorist cell that's going on there, terrorizing the Bechtlerites. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a Galdoina presence even in the prisons or something. Any ideas there? Because obviously, with a population of 1,500, crime is not going to be hugely prevalent, but there probably will still be some. It could just still be a quiet town, though. I'm going to say, let's say it's a fairly quiet town. But you know, I like the idea of having a Burnt Crows cell. The Burnt Crows are the Shanakesians, by the way, who were horribly scarred and almost wiped out by a blight that was brought down by the Bechtelite race, the human race of Bechtlerites, in an attempt to destroy them. The survivors, 100 years later, of the Shanakesians still bear the marks from that event. A lot of them are very bitter, and they have formed an underground resistance to the remaining Bechtelite empire called the Burnt Crows. The Bechtlerites, of course, call them terrorists. The Shanakesians call themselves freedom fighters, or in some cases, just purely revengers. So it's not uncommon for them to have a small cell in various places, especially if there's any strategic significance. So we'll say there's a Burnt Crows cell, which will, of course, lead to thievery, because they have to sustain themselves through illegal means. Vandalism, and the occasional abduction. Let's say occasional. Oh, wow! Look at that. I don't think I spelled that right, do you? Occasional abduction. So that's not too bad. When I say occasional, it's probably pretty rare. It's one of those things where they probably just do it to get ransom money. It takes money to run an organization, after all. So we have a political structure. We have kind of representatives within that structure. We have some degree of criminality that's been expressed, which opens up a lot of RP opportunities for players that might enter this town, depending on what side of that they fall on. Another interesting part of what we've done here is because of what we have here, we can actually use what we've built within the political structure to help build the city. They do have a city planning, and they also have infrastructure, which means the roads are going to be less haphazard. The streets are going to be some degree of clean, because infrastructure is a huge part of this. That means that there is going to be probably some form of sewage and waste removal. There's going to be a town guard or militia. Based upon this, there is going to be at least a tax collector and his security detail, which means there's also going to be a central vault somewhere within the city. So here, I should probably be writing these down, huh? All right. So we have sewage. My goodness. Rubbish collection, waste disposal. We have a town guard or militia. We have a private guard for the tax collector. And a central vault. All right. We obviously have some form of trade going on. Once again, the world does not exactly cater to agriculture very well anymore, except for one small section. So trade with that small section is actually fairly huge, not to mention the trade that occurs with the rest of the parts of the world. The Dwarven Kulvarkt Empire, for instance, still offers a whole lot of technological and engineering marvels that are traded freely within the Bactlarite Empire. So, once again, we're going to have a route, probably some form of housing for traders, and they're probably going to manage a lot of the storehouses, I would imagine, too. Warehouses and that type of thing. Beyond that, education means we're going to have some form of higher learning within this town. Probably going to have some form of primary, secondary school. And knowing the Bechtelrite, there probably will be at least one house of higher learning, because education is a huge deal for that entire culture. It's one of their big things. And then, of course, once again, with the medical, we have the Order of Benevolence that probably have a station within the town. So, now I won't go over everything. We have a water supply in town, one that necessarily won't facilitate trade every direction because of the waterfall, but at the same time can be utilized to move goods downriver, let's say, down the Kangas River. We know that we have some form of sewage, which probably means there's a large underground structure, most likely where the Burnt Crow Cell houses its people and plots and plans from. We also have rubbish disposal, meaning the city is fairly clean. A waste disposal means there's going to be a dump or a landfill somewhere. Hopefully they're not dumping it directly into the river, but these are, based on olden times, and that nastiness can happen. I'd like to think that the Bechtelrite are smarter than that and compost what they can, and probably landfill the rest, in fairness. We do have a town guard or militia. I'd say for a town this side, it's probably more of a militia, probably based on the size. I would say a citizens militia, if I had to go there. Basically, kind of the same concept as Minutemen, people who are armed and deputized to act at short notice should the need arise to defend their borders or to deal with any type of crime or incursion within the city walls. Um, the tax collector obviously would have a private guard. You cannot trust a citizens militia with that because they're just people. This private guard will be a well trained organization, probably guards from one of the bigger cities within the Bactharite Empire, because they are protecting the Bactharite Empire's tax, um, which is Big Daddy in the capital city's money. So yeah, they're going to send a better trained little guard for that. It also means they're going to have a central vault, a well secured location to store whatever they collect from their taxes. Um, Trade is going to be a matter of keeping the routes clear, at least within uh, the borders of the realm here. Um, Housing for traders that come in. They're probably going to have a government sponsored flop house or inn for traders to stay as they come through on their way. So once again, and I'm bringing all this up because this is helping us kind of visualize in our head the buildings that are going to need to be in our village, aside from the basic structures where people live. This is going to help us flesh out an actual map. Also, we're going to have a warehouse, at least one big warehouse, probably several, because you're going to want to separate certain goods. You're going to want to separate marketable trade goods from dry goods and foods to perishable items that are probably going to be stored somewhere where they can keep it cool. For instance, education. Now, a place this big, it could be that both the primary, secondary school and the higher learning institution are in one building. Most likely it will be, but it's still going to be separated on some level. It might be a small campus, for instance, with two buildings, or a large two-story structure where the higher learning takes place upstairs and the younger children are taught downstairs, for instance. But it gives us an opportunity to at least place something of a depository of knowledge within our village, which is handy because sometimes research needs to happen, and this offers an opportunity for that to happen. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, we have our medical Order of the Benevolence location. This is going to be its own separate building. I'd say for a place this size and established, something bigger than a field hospital. This will be definitely some form of center with beds and facilities for the various medical procedures that need to take place there. So I think at this point we've gotten pretty far in now. Like it's starting to flesh out our little town here of Silver Falls. It's starting to become more than a name. Once again, as I said before, as far as these individuals that run these six elected folk, I would love to see anybody's additions or suggestions for who those people actually are. If any of you need access to the source material, I'll make sure it's readily available so you can see the races and classes and some of the history of the world. Don't necessarily need it fully to come up with ideas, though, for people and personalities that can always be applied to the existing infrastructure of the game itself. That's not a problem. And if anybody would like to come up with an idea for the leader of the Burnt Crow's Cell, a Shanakesian militant underground rebellious leader type figure, I'd love to see that. And I think that would be a fun character for somebody to make and wrap their heads around. If you're unfamiliar, the Shanakesians are incredibly talented musicians and writers and poets and artists. But they've been horribly, horribly wronged and scarred because of it, physically as well as culturally and emotionally. Um, so this is a beautiful, tainted soul, most likely. Somebody that's troubled deeply and hurting from the loss of a culture that they've grown up never having the full chance to know other than stories told by their parents and their parents' parents and et cetera, et cetera. So much so that they've decided to take on this life of basically crime and try to deal whatever damage they can against the people who took that all away from them. So I think that would be a really interesting character for somebody to make. If you have any ideas, once again, reach out. Let me know. I want to hear your ideas and see what you have to offer. As I keep saying, this will be canon once it's all said and done. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and start bringing things to a close. I hope you've had a good time. Those of you who joined me in Twitch, thank you very, very much for letting me share this with you and sharing your ideas with me. I always want to hear about what's on your mind. We here at Homebrew RP want to encourage you guys to keep creative, keep building, keep homebrewing, and keep having fun. We're always here if you have any questions or concerns, and we're always here to help if you need help or advice with something you've created. We'd love to see it and help out if we can, and we'd love to bring you into our fold if you want to be a part of the Homebrew RP community. Become one of the Brewsters. We'd love to have you. So please come check us out. The information's in our Twitch channel there. Click on all the links. And I hope to see you soon. Once again, this is the Church Warden, a.k.a. the Wonka, coming to you live from the Lilly Pad here at the Epicenter of the Multiverse on twitch.tv/homebrewrp, putting my face in your interweb. Thank you, and goodbye.